So if I have this right, this is the current state of Canada. We have a selected, not elected, illegitimate, but still somehow legitimate prime minister who used to be a banker, who's being branded as this messiah, yet can't even speak properly. More ums and ahs than Justin Trudeau, which I did not know we were even able to ever surpass that in anyone's lifetime. Then you have the threat of America coming after our water. Yep, that's a new fear that's unlocked and very real. You also have our illegitimate, yet somehow legitimate prime minister who is on a spending spree somehow. $250 million to indigenous groups in Nunavut, also committing $6 billion to a missile defense system in Canada. Yeah, there's a lot going on, folks. There's a lot of spending and a lot of turbulence. Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another video, everybody. Before we get into it, I do want to encourage you all to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't yet already. It does really help grow the channel. And I want to remind you guys that these stickers are 20% off when you use code SAVECANADA. You can find the link down below in the description or the pinned comment below. These are just some of the new stickers. There are packs or individual stickers. Again, use code SAVECANADA and get yourself 20% off. Link is down below. Without further ado, let's get into it. Let's see what our illegitimate yet somehow legitimate prime minister has to say when it comes to the threat of Trump, basically.
My question is a little broader, pertains to my colleague's question. Your predecessor shared his assessment with the Canadian people and the world that President Trump's goals and motives in Canada were to economically crush the country in order to annex it. I know you've only been in power for a few days, but I'm sure you've had briefings and meetings. And I wonder, ahead of this phone call with President Trump, do you share Prime Minister Trudeau's assessment, or have you made your own personal assessment about what President Trump really wants from Canada?
Well, I think first and foremost, I think what President Trump wants, he wants several things. One is he wants to end the fentanyl crisis in the United States. I respect that. He wants good, high-paying jobs.
Yeah, I mean, we all want
America.
that
He
as
wants
well.
more investment in America. He wants repatriation of many American industries and firms to the United States. So, and I fully respect that. I think he will respect that as Prime Minister of Canada, I want to end the fentanyl crisis in Canada. I want to grow good, high-paying jobs in Canada. And of course, I want to protect with my colleagues and reaffirm and reinforce our sovereignty of all of Canada. So that's the starting point for the discussion.
Just listening closely to your answer previously, it sounded like you may be changing, and listening to what you said last night about the limits of retaliatory tariffs, for example. It sounds like maybe you are nuancing your strategy vis-a-vis President Trump by perhaps leaving trade talks to others. We know you have authorized these conversations to happen in Washington, D.C. as early as this week at USTR level. Are you going to be trying to focus more on positive things that you can talk about with President Trump?
I wouldn't necessarily have that characterization. What I'm saying is severalfold. The first, and I'll go back to where you started with your previous question, which is we are focused on building this economy. Today's announcement is, of course, about sovereignty, it's about protection, but it's also about building the economy here in Nunavut. We are going to build Canada. Canada is strong, and it's going to get stronger. We can give ourselves more than anything that President Trump or other trade partner can take away. Okay? That's a basic point. And that if there is a misconception of that in the United States, I'm not saying the president has that misconception, but if there's a misconception of that, we are going to disabuse that misconception. We're going to grow this economy because that's good for Canadians, better for our future, and we can do it. And we're going to do it.
Oh my goodness. All right. First of all, I got to say, I regret saying this months ago, that I can't wait for the day where politics become extremely boring again, because it's at the forefront of Canadian culture. Like, everything is so political now, and everybody is talking about politics. You go to the grocery store, someone is looking at the shelves at the prices. Now all of a sudden, all American things are ripped off the shelves and big freaking stickers, made in Canada, purchase this product at double or triple the price. And people are going, this is so expensive. Someone across the grocery store hears it. Well, let me tell you why it's so expensive. How much time you got? So everything is political. And I've said it before. I remember 6 months ago. I can't wait for the day where politics is boring again. I didn't realize it was going to happen this fast. That guy is so boring. He is the worst public speaker that I've seen. Again, that's a lot coming from fresh out of Justin Trudeau era. But more specifically, he's asked about Trump. And in this clip, again, ums and ahs. And I just don't know how this guy is supposed to be our prime minister. Like, I can't take him seriously.
You will have a call with President Trump in the coming days. What are your expectations for the president in that call?
I think, let me say a few things. The first is that the President of the United States, the Prime Minister of Canada, but certainly the President of the United States has many responsibilities, and there are many issues. I can think of many geostrategic issues that the President is helping to lead on, and you can think of events most recently in with respect to the Houthis and all the way through to trade and other aspects. So there's a wide range of issues to be discussed when we do connect. With respect to trade, I look forward to, at the appropriate time, having a discussion as two sovereign nations that is comprehensive, not targeted at one issue.
Usually at nighttime, I'll throw on like Joe Rogan or something on Spotify, and I'll hit 15 minutes or 30 minutes or something like that. But I have to consider Mark Carney. I'm not going to learn nothing. Absolutely not. It might actually make me significantly stupider, which none of us really want that. But that guy is going to put me to sleep if I listen to him talk for 5 minutes straight. It is the most boring and unqualified speaker I've ever seen in Canada. Again, that's coming out of the Justin Trudeau era, who is literally ridiculed for all his ums and ahs. Yet Carney takes the cake on that one. Speaking of cake, we've got the big fat pig mentality. Doug Ford has this to say about Trump calling Canada the 51st state.
Left there knowing what the U.S. wants, and I can tell you what they want. They're going to put a global tariff on the whole world. As Secretary Lutnick told us, he's not invading Canada and all the other nonsense that's been going on. He wants to boost up Canada. It's in their best interest. After, if I can put it bluntly, after they fill their plate. But I went on to mention that you can't flick on a switch and create a car plant overnight. We look forward to continuing these talks, and we aren't looking forward to April the 2nd, but we will retaliate, dollar for dollar, tariff for tariff. It is going to hurt the Americans. It is going to hurt us, but we can't roll over. Protectionism never works, never has worked in the history of this world. We need to have a free and fair trade deal with our closest allies, and they still are our closest allies. Well, they aren't coming into our country to take over, I'll tell you that. And I kind of flipped this around. What a compliment. We'll never be a 51st state. Canada's not for sale. But isn't it nice that someone thinks we have the greatest country in the world and they want access? And my simple answer to that is, you want access, let's build an AMCAN fortress that I've been saying. Let's supply more critical minerals. Let's supply more energy that you need. We are not the enemy. They know that. Their foe is China. That's their enemy, and ours to a certain degree. So let's just continue.
How can he say let's do more energy deals when he just a month ago, 3 weeks ago, was literally saying, I'm going to shut off the power to 1.5 million homes with a smile on my face? Like, I feel like he's freaking bipolar or something. Look, don't get me wrong. I'm glad that he's really turned away from that. It seems like America, the administration, put the fear of God in him, because he's a lot more docile now than when this first started. But again, weirdest reversal on a policy or on a stance I've ever seen in politics. Flat out.
That's the president. I can't answer for the president. He says whatever's on his mind, and it could change from day to day to day. But at the end of the day, he's the president, and he makes the choices. So I always believe in trying to get through this deal, and let's get back to normal. But the one thing the Americans will wake up real quick, this is going to hurt American jobs. A tariff on Canada is a tax on the American people. And I'll continue repeating it because I know that's the case.
Yeah, I think that we all just need to calm down and start to talk about solutions, because a trade war is obviously a massive concern, but so is our actual land, or in this case, our water. And it seems like America is coming for our water. So let's take a look here at this video, because this is frightening. I had this theory when I was a kid. What we're talking about specifically in this one is the Columbia River Treaty, and is Canada's water at risk? But I have been thinking about this and our Great Lakes since I was a kid. I mean, I grew up in Ontario, so all the Great Lakes are within that vicinity, right? And I was just really thinking, man, someday I feel like someone's going to come for our water, whether it's Russia or China or America, and it's a real risk. Let's take a look, folks.
So there's so much to unpack when it comes to Canada and the Americans and our relationship around water. But let's begin with the Columbia Water Treaty. What's going on here? What's gone wrong here?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's suffering from bad timing in a way. The treaty was reopened for negotiations in 2018, actually, during the last Trump administration. And negotiations have been ongoing ever since. In mid-2024, the negotiators reached an agreement, and it took until about December of 2024 to fully agree on the exact terms and nature that were going to be written down, which unfortunately did not leave enough time for the agreement to be ratified in Congress before the new administration took over in the U.S.
And, okay, so then what does that mean right now?
So the agreement is still in place, and it is still holding at this point. But pausing negotiations on this agreement means that at this point, there isn't a mechanism to proceed to actually ratifying it into law, to make it a treaty, which means that it's informal at best. And certainly the U.S. pausing negotiations is raising eyebrows a little bit in terms of whether or not it will actually make it to U.S. Congress in order to be brought into law. So although each party on each side right now is adhering to it, the question is, for how long can this be maintained?
This has brought up the larger issue of water, Canada's sovereignty, and President Trump's interest in our water supply. I was just listening to a piece by the New York Times earlier in the week where it seems that, according to their reporting, there was one of the last conversations between President Trump and then Prime Minister Trudeau, that Trump said Canada has too much water and it's unfair, and that the Americans need more access to it, which leads into this ongoing discussion about Canada's sovereignty. Give me a sense of how this is all being perceived.
Yeah, so I think there is a real difference between what is being said by the political leaders in a more heated context and what is actually happening on the ground. That said, this is not a new debate in some ways. You know, there's a long history of the U.S. having interest in Canada's water resources that dates back long before we have the current laws in place. And in fact, there was agreements back in the 1940s with discussions in the U.S. Congress in order to divert water, massive amounts of water from Canada to the U.S. We had this through the 80s and 90s with the Great Lakes, and now once again, here we are. Water is not part of NAFTA officially, but that has been contested. And so this whole rhetoric and talk around tariffs right now begs the question, along with Donald Trump openly contesting the boundary treaty, which is in fact defined, the boundary between Canada and the U.S. is actually defined in the Waters Treaty. That was the first time that it was actually surveyed. So it does beg the question as to whether there is some interest by the U.S. in bringing water, Canadian water specifically, and transboundary water into tariff talk and into NAFTA again.
Can you put this all into layman's terms for us, Professor? What does this mean? Is our access to our water in threat right now?
Yes, I would say in large part, Canadians need to understand that just like being Canadian is a large part of our identity and being sovereign is a part of our identity, having water and our access to water and resources is a large part of our identity too. And I think because of that, Canadians oftentimes don't think about the fact that water flows across the border and is in fact something that can be contested by the US in terms of where that border exists and whose water is whose. And I would say that here in Canada right now, with our current laws and governance around water, we're ill prepared to deal with the threats that would come at us from a US administration. And the main reason I say that is because in our Water Act, water is actually defined as being owned by the provinces and the territories in Canada, which means that it's largely the responsibility of each individual province and territory to defend and form treaties with the United States. So it is not actually handled at the federal level by the Canadian government at this point.
And I mean, that would be fixed with intraprovincial trade barriers being pushed down, because it's a pro and a con depending what you're talking about, and like the circumstances, they vary. But this is something that is kind of weird about Canada, is that provinces act independently from federal ruling when it comes to whatever is on that land. That's why Alberta has all the say in Alberta oil and gas, and that's why you don't have a prime minister negotiating trade deals for oil and gas with other countries, is because it's not the prime minister who's setting the price on that, unless given authorization by the premier of Alberta, right? Because it's Alberta's oil. So there's pros and cons to that philosophy. But I'd love to know what you guys think down below. When it comes to our water, should it be federally regulated, or should the provinces kind of have a say?
And when you say defend, how exactly are you picturing defense?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not talking about boots on the ground at this point, let's hope. I'm really talking about economically and also as a resource. So the US has made it very clear that the main motivation for a lot of this tariff talk, particularly recently, is economically driven. And, economics for them not only encompasses having access to resources such as water, but many of the rivers that cross the Canada-US boundary are used for hydropower production. So that's an energy-based resource. And we know this administration is extremely focused on creating better and cheaper access to energy in the United States. And part of that comes from water that is generated, in the case of the Columbia River Treaty, from water that is stored on the Canadian side and promised to the US, almost like a battery in a way, in a cell phone. Canada stores the water, and then the US can use that to generate hydropower on the American side.
Professor Stadnik, what seems troubling to me, based on what you're telling us, is that, for example, when this current American administration says that they're imposing the tariffs for national security reasons, with this allegation of fentanyl streaming through Canada, even though the evidence indicates that that is not in fact the case, and Canada is fighting this legally under international law. But it seems that the Americans do have a pretty valid case on the waterfront, because we haven't necessarily bolstered up our laws to protect what happens to be in our geographic region, which is the water. So what do you think needs to happen, and what do you think is likely going to happen with this American administration?
That's a fantastic question. And I agree with you entirely that really what we need to do is put water on the radar. We need to not assume that our water is our water. There's lots of things that are being contested right now, lots of different international laws and treaties that are far more sound than some of our boundary waters treaties and other things governing water. So what needs to happen first and foremost is we need to have a federal strategy. I'm not talking about taking power away from provinces and territories, but really we need to work together at all levels of government to be prepared to respond to very real threats over our natural resources, not the least of which is including water. The second thing that needs to happen is we need to look at all of the issues from the U.S. around the Columbia River Treaty as not just the Columbia River, which is on the West Coast and out of a lot of Canadians' minds, but very much connected to the Great Lakes and all of the agreements that we have in place for all 13 river basins and lakes that span the Canada-U.S. border. And the third thing is for Canadians just to understand a little bit more that the water that we have should not be taken for granted. It should not be assumed that the way the border is defined and the way in which the water originates in Canada right now, in many of the cases, will always be that case. We need to make sure that we're ready and prepared to deal with whatever can come at us, including the long history of wanting to embed water as a trade negotiation between Canada and the U.S.
Okay.
Oh my God, he's coming for our water, folks. It's just a matter of time, man. This is pretty scary stuff, and it's very real. And I don't know if I'm even prepared for it. I mean, he's gone ahead, and President Trump has changed Gulf of America, or Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America. Maps across the world are now updating digitally, and there's probably going to be printouts that say Gulf of America in the very near future, if it hasn't already begun. But the same thing, I think, could happen to our Great Lakes and rivers that cross into America. America is just on this really pro-patriotic rampage, and they're steamrolling over anyone that gets in their way. And I'm not saying that we should just like bend over, elbows up by touching our toes type of thing like the liberals are proposing, but this is kind of nerve-wracking. Maybe I'm overthinking it. Or maybe it's like a childhood fear of mine that I've figured out since I was like 10 years old, just walking around, like different parts of Ontario, just thinking. I just remember walking down country roads going, what about our water? Yeah, anyways, it's kind of scary that this is actually happening. Next up, you have Prime Minister Carney, who announced some increases in our Arctic security. So let's take a look briefly at some of this stuff.
Arctic sovereignty is a strategic priority of our government. The world is changing. Our adversaries are increasingly emboldened. International institutions and norms that have kept Canada secure are now being called into question. Our government recognizes that while Canada must be strong in our partnerships, particularly NORAD, and today's announcement will strengthen our commitment to NORAD, well, that is true. We cannot and should not look first to others to defend our nation.
The Prime Minister announced a number of measures to boost that security and improve living conditions for some of those who reside in Nunavut. The CBC's Karina Roman joins us from Ottawa with more. So, Karina, take us through what Carney had to say about sovereignty and security.
Well, as you heard there, sovereignty and security go hand in hand, according to Mark Carney. And what he was essentially saying there is that we need to show that we can do it ourselves. Yes, we have NORAD. We are a partner in NORAD. We need to be a good partner in NORAD, which is our bilateral security arrangement with the U.S. But we also need to show that we can do it on our own and not look to others to defend us. And so there's a number of measures that he announced, things that clearly had been in the works for a while, but he is the one to announce them before he's even been Prime Minister for a week. So he said that the Arctic basically is Canada, that when we're talking about True North, Strong and Free...
Dude, this guy is taking all of Pierre Poilievre's talking points. Like, Pierre is the only Canadian politician in recent years that has been so persistent on we need to start securing our North. Like, he did a massive, impactful speech up in Iqaluit, like not too long ago. And now Mark Carney out of nowhere is just poaching all of these ideas. It's freaking weird.
It really starts there. And so one of the things is, of course, to detect threats. And so he announced that Canada is going to partner with Australia on an early warning detection system in the Arctic. Basically, it's called an over-the-horizon radar technology system. It will require a $6 billion investment, which is part of an envelope of money previously announced to modernize NORAD, or Canada's part in NORAD. This system would provide coverage in terms of early detection of threats from the Canada-United States border into the Arctic. Then there is also money to increase Canadian Armed Forces' presence in the Arctic in terms of personnel, so a greater number of armed forces up north, but a sustained presence as well, talking about year-round presence, looking at a price tag of $420 million for that investment. And this comes on the...
Is government not prorogued? Like, look, I don't know when he gave himself these emergency powers to be committing all of this money right away. I mean, the guy hasn't been elected. He's not. I get that it's a weird loophole, and yes, he's a legitimate, but kind of illegitimate, but also gray area legitimate prime minister. But government is prorogued. None of these have gone into debates, like. Not that it necessarily needs to be debated, because the Conservatives also agree that we should be putting more stuff in the North. But again, didn't Mark Carney just recently cancel like a massive order of F-35s, and it cost us hundreds of millions just to cancel that order? Like, how is he spending money? How is he spending money? We're prorogued.
The heels of a previously announced investment by the previous prime minister or government this month that the federal government will build northern military operational support hubs in Iqaluit, Inuvik, and Yellowknife, with more to be announced on that as well. So this is all part of an endeavor to both show strength and show strength in the Arctic, but also on practical terms to actually be able to back that up with the machinery of the military.
And part of this plan also involves helping build northern communities. So what's the idea behind that, Karina?
Well, the Nunavut Premier, PJ Akiaguk, said that security depends on resilient communities. And Mark Carney said he agrees with that. And so part of the announcement is about the communities that are up there. And so $253 million towards the northern economy. That includes upgrading power plants, improving critical housing infrastructure, building and repairing hundreds of homes across Nunavut, and the help to complete the first phase of a hydroelectric facility. So that's the actual announcement. Now, Mark Carney said that strengthening the economy doesn't just mean, in the 150 kilometers of the most populous parts of Canada in terms of how near to the U.S. border it is. It does include all regions of Canada, and the North has a lot of potential that needs to be tapped into. And he talked about this being, as you heard earlier, symbolic and strategic. And it goes back to his mantra that he has now started to use quite a bit, which is this whole masters in our own house. So this is about creating a strong economy within our own borders, and that includes the North. And so Mark Carney was asked about that, especially, of course, in relation to the threats, economic threats, that Canada is facing from the U.S. Have a listen.
We are going to build Canada out. Canada is strong, and it's going to get stronger. We can give ourselves more than anything that President Trump or other trade partner can take away. Okay? That's a basic point. And that if there is a misconception of that in the United States, I'm not saying the president has that misconception, but if there's a misconception of that, we are going to disabuse that misconception.
Now, of course, Carney was asked about a potential phone call with Donald Trump. Well, it has not been scheduled yet, but it is what we hear in the works to be scheduled.
Yeah, I don't know how well that's going to go. I mean, President Trump did not respect Justin Trudeau, who was unfortunately a legitimate prime minister, albeit very unqualified, right? Being a failed drama teacher. Mark Carney is in that gray area right now, and I'm sure President Trump knows about this. We're going to have to wait and see how this phone call goes. We're going to hear Trump's end probably first before we hear Mark Carney's end. But again, all of that should happen either today or maybe even tomorrow. That is the end of the video, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it. I'd love to know your guys' thoughts and comments about any of the topics that were covered. What do you think about securing our Arctic? Do you think that's a good idea? Do you think that's a bad idea? Let me know why. If you haven't yet already, I'd like to encourage you guys to hit the like button and subscribe, and I'll see you in another video. Bye for now.